Whatever it takes.
Hello and welcome to Screen Fever. My name is Adam Barnard, and today I am joined by my friend and collaborator Jackson Smith for our seemingly annual at this point MCU discussion, this time for the road to Endgame. So last April, Jackson and I sat down right before the release of Avengers Infinity War to discuss our expectations for the project as well as the decade-long road to this movie, specifically with the understanding that Kevin Feige and everyone at Marvel have been consciously building up to a story of this scale with this specific villain. And so now that we're in the next April of 2019, and we're on the cusp of Endgame, which is seemingly going to one-up Avengers Infinity War in scope, we just wanted to sit down again and kind of recap our thoughts on Infinity War and look ahead to where this movie might bring the MCU, because there are a lot of balls up in the air in terms of cast and story and who's going to live and what the hell is going on with the MCU. So I figured now, right before, a couple weeks out from Endgame, we should just sit down and unpack everything that's on our minds.
Boy, is there a lot to unpack. Yeah, I mean, I few movies, I think, in our lifetime have really reverberated throughout global pop culture the way that Infinity War did. This movie is the highest grossing movie to not be a Star Wars movie or directed by James Cameron. It made over $2 billion, which is a lot of money, and was shocking for people who have followed this franchise since Iron Man back in 2008. As most of you know by now, literally half of the Marvel Cinematic Universe got killed off. I use air quotes with that at the end of that movie, when Thanos essentially did exactly what he wanted to do and killed off half of the universe. So there's a lot of expectation going into Endgame, because this is sort of the end of the
end game for this era.
Yeah, well, it's the end game of this era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, obviously Disney is going to keep making these movies. They make tons of money. People really, really like them, but this is they've at least chalked this up to be the end of this first era with this main core group of Avengers, namely Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor, and I guess the Hulk too. Poor Hulk always gets put by the wayside.
And last movie had like erectile dysfunction, Hulk dysfunction, or something. That was
I've heard this theory that he can't turn into the Hulk because he's actually Loki in disguise, which would be interesting. Anyway, so so you've got that expectation going into it, but you've also got the expectation of that massive cliffhanger ending at the end of Infinity War. How are the Avengers going to reverse this? I mean, we all kind of know in the back of our heads that they will, because I mean, hell, there's another Spider-Man movie.
Spider-Man, Guardians,
Black Panther.
Yeah, there's no way, just logistically, there's no way they can do this unless all the movies are prequels coming up, which I really, oh my God, hope to God that's not the case. But
so it's a question of how. It's a question of how are the Avengers going to go about undoing Thanos's infamous snap, and who's going to make it out? Because yeah, exactly. Who's going to make it out? Because a lot of these actors, their contracts are up. I know Chris Evans' contract is up. Robert Downey Jr.'s contract is up. And they've been sort of prepping to part ways with these characters. So you've got this anticipation that some of these people aren't going to make it out alive, which would be a huge deal, because aside from that big snap at the end of Infinity War, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has sort of shied away from killing off characters. which is unusual.
Which, yeah, I mean, characters will depart the MCU, but that doesn't mean they're also going to die in the canon.
Exactly.
I mean, that's something to consider. I think all of us were convinced, or many of us were convinced, that either Captain America or Iron Man or both were going to get killed in Infinity War, and everyone else got killed except for them. So this movie is going to have a lot of weight on its shoulders to in a satisfying manner conclude many character journeys. I mean, just looking at the Endgame trailer, there was one great beat between Captain America and Iron Man that referenced Civil War, and something that I had really forgotten about their beef because so much has happened in the MCU. I mean, Civil War was almost 3 years ago.
Wow.
And so, I mean, there is almost like a sense of a bittersweet sense of like one last hurrah. And also I get the tone from the trailer for Endgame that even if they win, which I'm sure they will, it's not going to be a victory in a sense. It is a rescue mission more than a victory. You know, the fact that this has happened means you are opening Pandora's box to an extent.
Yeah.
And so part of the, you know, I think even just in the trailer, and I assume equally so, if not more so in the movie, they're keeping track of all these character arcs, and in, you know, against the canvas of one of the battle for half of humanity, we're going to see a lot of these characters' journeys and these characters' relationships with each other come to fruition. And that's kind of hard because when you look at the MCU, it's almost my generation Star Wars.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone knew what Marvel Comics were, but these movies were not arbitrarily successful from the start. I mean, this multi-billion-dollar movie machine has only come about due to the work of the last 10 years. And we've watched, you know, movies come from a modest size of Iron Man or the first Avenger to get to a shared universe. We have 30 or 40 starring characters that people have some kind of attachment to. I mean, that's, you know, to your point, it's like a cultural touchstone. It's a cultural moment that doesn't happen often. And it's amazing. Just in the last 4 years, I feel like everyone thought Star Wars was going to be this scope and have this kind of global resonance when they started the new trilogy. And actually Star Wars is kind of, it's not diminished, but it isn't taking center stage. And right now in the last 4 years, we've seen Marvel go from huge to titanic, beyond what I think any of us could have anticipated.
So, Adam, my question with all that being said is, what do you think is going to happen, both in terms of like, well, how are the Avengers going to go about undoing Thanos' snap, but how is what they're going to do, how is it going to change the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and what is that going to mean for the rest of the movies going forward? Because it's like you said, like, this is a global phenomenon and people are flocking to these movies and love these movies. They're going to have to keep making them. It's the reason we keep getting Star Wars movies. But if they just undo Thanos' snap like nothing ever happened, how can we evolve? How can we move forward? How can these movies change and become something else? So it begs that question, what's going to happen? And all we can do is theorize at this point, but I'm curious to know what your theories are. I
don't know if I can present theories that other people haven't presented much more intelligently than I will. Mm-hmm. What I can say is I'm starting to hone in on where I think this movie is going to end tonally. And that's going to be a bittersweet sense of hope, but also, maybe nostalgia isn't the right word. Sentiment. Mm-hmm. You know, there's going to be, of course, I believe they will have to be victorious, if for no other reason than logistically we have to resuscitate some of these characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you got to think, you know, judging by the precedent of the Russo brothers and the screenwriters and the producers at the MCU, they're not going to usher out, you know, 5 or 6 main characters and not give much thought to it, or not have to tailor the movie's ending to recognize that there's going to be a changing of the guard. I mean, if we look forward, we have Black Widow, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Black Panther, and Guardians as the movies coming. That's radically different than Thor, Iron Man, Captain America trilogy.
And a lot of those characters got killed off at the end of Infinity War. So it's like, how can you even
will stay dead?
Yeah. So it's like, how can you even have another Black Panther movie when Black Panther's gone, or another Spider-Man movie when Spider-Man's gone? It's like, you have to sort of do that. But, you know, like but
you see what I mean? Like the next phase, I guess, was going to be phase 4. Just the kinds of movies we're getting are nothing like the lead up. to
Yeah.
Infinity to
Yeah.
Endgame. And if we're if last year we looked at or if last time with the Infinity War discussion we looked at 10 years, now we're looking at 11. It really feels like this is the year. I mean, also with the introduction of Captain Marvel, of course we're going to get a sequel. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry that I forgot that one. I haven't seen it yet, so I guess it's a loose screw in my brain right now.
Well, I've heard whispers that the new phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to emphasize sort of the cosmic aspect of it.
No, me too.
What's the
Eternals?
The Eternals is one of the movies that they've been sort of teasing the production of,
and that's going to production later this
it's
year.
going, yeah. So, and that's sort of about these big eternal beings,
Celestials,
off in the celestials,
kind of like
off
we
in
saw
the
in Guardians.
Yeah, exactly, like off in the galaxy. And then of course you've got James Gunn's third and much hyped Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And you've got more Captain Marvel sequels, which will, I bet, go into more of the Kree Skull conflict that was teased in Captain Marvel. So in terms of anticipating Endgame, I think the movie's definitely going to open up the world a little bit more to different characters and different possibilities outside of Earth. The Marvel Cinematic Universe up to this point has been pretty grounded, and I mean that literally. Like, so much of it has been set on Earth.
Yeah.
And I think if Endgame and Infinity War are doing anything, they're really throwing the lid open and taking it out into the rest of the universe and introducing us to the rest of the universe. So,
and I'm so glad you brought this up, because when we look at the inception of this era of the MCU, or this integrated cinematic universe, we're looking at 2008's Iron Man. And in that movie, Tony Stark is a weapons contractor in a Bush era wartime. You know what I'm saying? This is like 2007, 2008. And at that point, we have to realize that however much it's trying to adhere to our current culture, in 2008, it inevitably started a parallel timeline.
Yeah.
It's trying to stay somewhat photorealistic to the world we know, but if someone like Tony Stark invented an Iron Man suit in 2007, and that's only the start of technological advances when it comes to energy and defense and transportation and anything, and with the places like Wakanda coming into the public sphere, our world would look nothing. I mean, Trump wouldn't be president for starters, but like, hopefully not. But our world would look so incredibly different.
Yeah.
And so at some point, you have to think they can't keep trying to play New York as looking like New York, or as rural America looking like rural America, because it just wouldn't.
Yeah.
The infrastructure and the social structure, everything would change, especially if, America or New York was attacked. So, I mean, it actually might even be overdue, but if nothing else, now is a great time to kind of give a finale to the more grounded era of the MCU with a climactic event like half of life being eradicated. And, especially if half of life was eradicated on Earth, or someone like Thanos was recognized in public as an enemy, you would be opening up an entire new era of our planet and their integration with the rest of the universe. And that, I was kind of wondering where it would go after Avengers, but this makes all the sense in the world. And it's bold, audacious, ambitious, could go wrong a million different ways, has gone wrong in other, franchises or cinematic universes. But like, if anyone's going to pull it off, I definitely have faith that the people at Marvel and Kevin Feige and Disney can really do something even more unprecedented than what we've seen already.
Well, what you said just brought up an interesting thought for me. If probably when the Avengers undo Thanos' snap, is everybody going to remember what happened?
Yeah,
it's it goes back to what you're saying. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has always been about, taking our status quo and constantly changing it, introducing new scientific and fantasy elements into the mix. It's like if the entire other half of the universe came back to life, but everybody had this memory of what happened, the universe would look so radically different, because you're right. The Pandora's box is open. There are no borders or boundaries between what we know is possible. Everything is possible. And that just sets a really interesting precedent for the rest of this universe. So I'm hoping that's the case, honestly. I'm going to be, I'm probably going to like
conflicted.
Yeah. It's like, I like fan theories, but I also think too much fan expectation can ruin a movie. Case in point, the last Star Wars movie. But you know, I would be very pleased if they didn't go the, oh, we're just going to go back in time and make sure it didn't happen route, because it's a little, it's easy, and it doesn't really change things going forward. It doesn't throw open the world to new possibilities. It just resets to whatever the status quo is before Thanos snapped, you know?
Yeah. I think they will do. I don't think they're going to do a hard reversal. There'll have to be some kind of consequence. I can't with the tone, just with the tone of Infinity War. I can't see them doing a hard 180 and saying, "Oh, that's everything's fine." And especially in retrospect, that would cheapen the events of Infinity War.
It would.
If I 10 years later or 20 years later I show this movie to my kids, they watch Infinity War and then they watch Endgame and it ends all happy-go-lucky. They're like, "Well, what I felt in Infinity War was just invalidated."
Yeah.
And so that's something that, I think these guys are really shrewd storytellers, so they're not going to take a cheap road in this instance.
Well, even you look at the other Avengers movies, and it's like each one of those movies has a happy ending and the Avengers win, but like
different filmmakers, though.
Different filmmakers, but at the first Avengers movie, New York was attacked, and the New York attack is something that gets constantly referenced and impacts that universe, so specifically Earth, on and on and on and on throughout the different movies. When in Age of Ultron, when he drops that city, when he blows up that whole city, that is the start of a lot of the conflict for Civil War, and sort of those consequences reverberate throughout all these other different movies. So yeah, it would definitely cheapen it to just have it be reversed, because then it's like, yeah, then your story doesn't have any consequence. And even the not as good Avengers movies up till this point, they've had serious consequence. So yeah, I'm hoping whatever the solution is to Thanos' snap actually has some weight and gives these movies some weight going forward as they continue to change and evolve.
So next question.
Yeah.
How does the quantum realm factor into Endgame?
Does it factor into Endgame? We don't know yet.
I think it almost has to. Aren't they in those suits that are the suits in that shot?
Kevin Feige, I think it was Kevin Feige who said after Ant-Man and the Wasp came out that they were like, the quantum realm is going to be our next big thing.
Next frontier.
The next frontier. And, I liked Ant-Man and the Wasp a lot, but the quantum realm kind of just felt like a cool VFX place for them to go. I didn't really see the potential in that, but if it is used as a place that they go to in Endgame, yeah, the possibilities are really, exciting, but I honestly don't know.
It might be, how do they utilize the quantum realm to manipulate reality, or come back with some kind of way, come up with some kind of way to fix it? It might, I guess, like, on top of just integrating with other galaxies or cultures as part of the story, we also have interdimensional superheroes in a sense between Doctor Strange and Ant-Man and some others that will probably start to get introduced. These characters have new powers, and powers that aren't so much as like, Tony Stark's suit or Captain America's super strength, but rather access to different realms or means but to transport themselves to something. It's just talking about it now, I'm discovering things as we're discussing this. Like, the MCU may look radically different in 3 or 4 years. I think it needs to evolve, because at some point, it's like at some point it'll apex, and to continue expanding, it's going to have to evolve.
Exactly.
Like any creature, like any organic creature.
Like any franchise. I hate bringing up Star Wars again, because I always feel like I end up bringing up Star Wars. But
and it's okay to criticize this era, even if you like The Last Jedi.
Well, yeah, it's okay. But I think Star Wars is in a place where it's evolving to have to stay relevant. And I think that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, because they don't want Star Wars to evolve. They want it to remain this magical thing that they had on VHS when they were a kid. But you're right, like every franchise, whether it's Marvel or Star Wars or just movies in general, to stay relevant and to stay popular in our collective conscience, they have to be changing, So introducing the quantum realm, introducing new corners of this galaxy, like these are, my expectations going into Endgame is not necessarily like, how are they gonna do the thing? Who's gonna die? Like, I think we all know Captain America's probably gonna die. My expectations are like, what is the universe going to look like at the end of this movie? What different kinds of Marvel movies are we going to be seeing in the next 10 years leading up to whatever the next Infinity War level event is? It's like that's sort of what I'm quote unquote expecting going into this movie, and I'm comfortable with that, because it's not like I'm waiting for any fan theories to be confirmed. I mean, like I said, there are definitely things I would like to see, but it's more just a general excitement to see what Kevin Feige and the Russo brothers sort of have planned for this next chapter of the biggest franchise on the planet.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Just quick comment on the Star Wars reference. Like, Force Awakens was a borderline remake of A New Hope.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It was cashing in on the nostalgia or the desire to return to an original trilogy-like setting. The problem was the difference between Force Awakens and Endgame. Force Awakens and Infinity War, both of which grossed similar amounts, was that Force Awakens was pretty much cashing in on all that anticipation of seeing Luke and Leia and Han, and then it hands it off to Rian Johnson and says, do something different. And there wasn't exactly a trajectory that they were building. It was literally, here's our celebratory return, and now with The Last Jedi, we're going to start to evolve. And then you have Rogue One and Solo, which are kind of retro movies in their own sense. And as a result, I think the interest has tapered off, because it's like, we started with the climax. We started with a cashing in all the nostalgia, all the characters coming back, and now it's like they have to come back down to earth before they can build up the Star Wars franchise again. I think it's the wrong way to go. I think they should have done what Marvel did and start a little bit smaller and introduce new characters, and then as we build, discover these characters and bring in more of those elements and see story elements to fruition moving forward in a shared, coordinated universe. That's why I think, we have Marvel movies that start out grossing $300 million, and now it's like if a Marvel movie doesn't gross $1 billion, it's like underperforming or whatever. And, going forward, if there is a coordination, if there is a continued build, we're going to see like, $1.5 billion or $2 billion become the new standard for these crossover movies.
So.
And that's not to discount what Star Wars is doing. I have no doubt in my mind that it will completely recover, I think, and they're gonna explore TV, and they're gonna explore other peripheral stories and build their own lore and get people excited again. But it is interesting because as the MCU built up to something like Infinity War, it felt like Star Wars started with their own version of Infinity War, and now is gonna have to take a meandrous route back to whatever cinematic universe is trying to build.
Well, it's about building your audience. I mean, I think like I using the DC movies as a reference. Like, if that Justice League movie would come out later, if it were coming out later this year, that thing would have made $1 billion. You know
talking
why?
About
the bad one.
Justice League.
Yeah, the bad one. But it doesn't matter if it was bad. That movie would make $1 billion if it came out later this year, because we now have Wonder Woman and Aquaman
and Shazam
and Shazam. Well, he's not in it, but if he were, you would be able to release that movie, and regardless of how good it was, there would be this anticipation for it, because you're starting with the smaller stories and building up to the bigger ones, and they didn't do that. Obviously, I think their priorities were so out of whack, and now it's a little too late to be picking up that slack. But Marvel has done a really good job of that. Like the anticipation for Endgame is so huge because this is something that has started with such a small seed, and over the course of 11 years built up to this action movie the size of the cosmos. So,
when 2010, when The Expendables came out, that to me was like, whoa, how do you have that many movie stars in one movie? Like, how do you have a movie of that scale?
Yeah.
That's crazy. And now, like, Expendables looks like a low budget indie film compared to like where the MCU has gone. I mean,
gosh.
it has had effects that have reverberated past the MCU, which is really cool. I do want to ask about, since this is technically a road to Endgame discussion, just looking at everything that has come before Endgame as a unit of however 20-something films. 22, thank you. I lost track somewhere around 19 or 18. I remember using that number, and now we're way past it, so I've gotten a little disoriented. Looking back at the 22 movies, is it going to be something that is going to have an enduring legacy? Or is it going to be something where it's like, yeah, there was a few good through lines and a few good characters, but in future generations, it's not going to resonate?
Oh, well, I mean, any movie that makes $2 billion is going to have an enduring legacy, you know? I mean, but like, you know, even if it isn't as relevant 25, 30 years from now, it will still be known, you know,
Yeah.
like what's a good example, you know? Like
Of franchises? Or
yeah, just something
I mean, we have
yeah.
Star Wars, which is something
Yeah.
that started from as an original property,
Yeah.
became huge, and 40 years later is still just as significant, if not more significant. I mean, it is baked into my generation's way of telling stories.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
so my question is kind of, is this going to have
That
the same
kind of influence?
impact? Are
Oh,
our
I
kids,
see what you mean.
Are
yeah.
our kids going to be waiting for the Captain America continuation? Chris Evans coming back at 7 years old to play an alternate reality, alternate universe Captain America, or is it something that's, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well,
it's a very difficult question to answer with very little information, but it's one that I feel like is worth asking. You know what I'm saying?
All of the kids nowadays are hyped for the new Star Wars movies, but they're not hyped for the new Star Wars movies because they like the old ones. They're hyped for the new Star Wars movies because they really like Rey, Finn, and Poe. Or people our age are hyped for the new Star Wars movies because we remember seeing Episode 1, Phantom Menace, when we were kids, and everybody who's older remembers seeing the original trilogy in theaters. So it's like, to answer that question specifically, it's like the for that to happen, I think it's going to have to keep going and keep evolving. Like,
so something that never stops. Literally, the ball just
keeps
rolling.
In a way, but like, I don't really think about it that way. I think about it in terms of, like there are going to be eras of the MCU. This is the climax to this era of the MCU. We're going to be entering a new era of the MCU in the same way that you had the original Star Wars trilogy, and then you had the prequel trilogy, and now you have the sequel trilogy. Like, or James Bond. Like Sean Connery's James Bond is a totally different era than Roger Moore's James Bond, is a totally different era than Pierce Brosnan's James Bond. And then we have the Daniel Craig James Bonds. It's like that franchise is able to keep going because it keeps resetting its own status quo, because it keeps changing up who's playing the lead character, the aesthetic approach to those movies. And because of that, it keeps being relevant generation after generation.
Well, but that's a great example, an interesting example at least to bring up, because it has one character that it continues to recast, and the through line is the character. I can't see Marvel recasting Iron Man over and over, or recasting Captain America.
It would all be in the same universe, I think. It would all be in the same universe, just in the same way Star Wars has all been in the same universe.
Which to me would be crazy. I mean, if this continues for another 10 or 20 years, which it very well could, you're looking at like 50 or 60 films that are part of an interconnected universe, if not more. I mean, I can't imagine as a consumer or as a person being born into that kind of era where art will span 30 or 40 years. Like, imagine if Ben-Hur had like 20 subsequent movies about wars in the desert. I mean, that would be like mind-boggling to see a story played out, because that's what's the most interesting thing about the MCU. Just in terms of art and our society, human beings' ability to tell stories through different mediums. This is the first time we've seen high-budget narrative filmmaking span this many movies with a single story. Like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was so cool for us growing
movies.
Up.
Yeah.
It was 6. Well, I'm trying to forget the Hobbit movies even happened, but let's just rewind the clock to like 2005 or 2007 or whatever. And watching those movies as a young kid, it didn't even feel like a trilogy, because it's like these are like 3-hour movies, and it just takes you on this journey that is clearly premeditated and designed with care. If done correctly, we're going to get that same feeling from a story with 30 movies or 40 movies of a comparable budget. If you told me that at age 12, you have no reference point to even fathom what that would look like. You don't have a reference point.
There really isn't one.
I mean, it's like we're watching creative history being written in real time.
The closest point is comic books themselves. I mean, no, because that's the thing. Like these are comic book movies, and my dad grew up reading like OG Spider-Man comics, and kids younger than me are like growing up reading Gwen Stacy and Miles Morales comics, and they're all set in the same universe. It's weird that the only precedent we have for Marvel is Marvel itself, our comics themselves. It's like, you're right. They're never going to recast Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. Somebody else is just going to put on the Iron Man suit. You're just going to have different Iron Mans. That's what's cool about comic books, is that you can have different people step into these mantles, have it work, and not have to do a James Bond thing where it's like a reboot.
But do they need to bring Iron Man back? I mean, the wealth of characters they have the ability to pull on, and also characters who have the character archetype of Iron Man, a la Doctor Strange. I mean, if we need a arrogant, slick, macho, new wave tech guru in his 40s or 50s.
Well,
I mean,
that's the kind
Doctor
of debate
Strange.
it's funny because that's the kind of debate that's been going on in comics right now. Like, you're seeing, different younger characters, specifically characters of color, although that's not entirely relevant, but people seem to insist on making it relevant.
But it's expanding who we include in our story, so that is relevant.
It is relevant, but they're picking up the mantle of other superheroes as opposed to new superheroes, and that's frustrating for a lot of people. Like you said, It's like, well, why don't you just have such a wealth of characters to pull from? Why don't you just make new characters and do other characters? Why have somebody else pick up the Iron Man mantle? And that's an honest question, but I think there's a familiarity with that. Like, we see the iconography associated with Iron Man. We see the iconography associated with Thor or Spider-Man, and we gravitate towards that because it's familiar. Yeah. So you would want, if I putting my producer hat on, you would want to, have Iron Man, but have somebody else be Iron Man. And honestly, I think Marvel's setting it up so that that's possible. I know, like, hell, like in Spider-Man Homecoming, Miles Morales' uncle is in that movie. They're already setting up Miles Morales as a Spider-Man years in advance. That's crazy. That's crazy.
But at the same time, is it done in a way where it's like, oh, hey, here's a new Iron Man, just accept it for what it is? Or is the mantle passed in a way that makes sense? Or is the mantle passed down in a way that makes sense within the diegesis of the story? Do you see what? Because that's important to me.
We'll
it's like,
if
this universe is supposed to be so grounded and so realistic, and it is not hyper stylized. It capitalizes itself on, or it finds its identity in recognizable human behavior.
Yeah.
We think if these kinds of people existed, this is how they would behave. This is how they would make decisions. This is how our culture would interact with them. Is it going to make sense if a new Iron Man keeps popping up every 5 or 10 years, unless the suit or the mantle or the character of Iron Man within this fictional universe is continued or is passed down? Like almost like someone wearing a suit that can change or evolve.
I mean, I guess we'll see. We'll see. Well, I don't know how they're gonna. I don't know how they're gonna.
But would you want them to? Would you?
Oh yeah.
Would you be okay with them just doing a bait and switch with characters where it's like, now we have because this actor playing the character?
I think so, because like I said, they do it in the comics, and I think they're able to do it successfully. Like, I mean, Spider-Man is a good example. Like, I think, Miles Morales is Spider-Man. He is Spider-Man. Like, he is Spider-Man, but he's also his own Spider-Man. He has his own specific kind of outfit. He has powers that are specific to him. So it's going to look kind of different, but it's still, like I said, I think going to associate itself with the name and iconography, and a lot of times the powers of whoever that original superhero was. But I mean, I don't even, again, I'm just speculating here. I don't know if this is deep into speculation. This is deep into speculation, but like, we're trying to figure out what this universe is going to look like after Endgame. And like I said, these actors' contracts are up, like this might be the end for a lot of these people. So what's going to happen? It's just a possibility.
Two thoughts. One, I can't see characters like Cap or Iron Man getting recast after these characters' legacies are so deeply tied to the actors and their performances, if that makes sense. I mean, yes, we have had several people. We've had 3 people play the Joker in the last 10 years. But God, that universe is a wreck in terms of
it's all different. They're all set in their own little universes.
Yeah, exactly. And technically with James Bond, every time a new person gets cast, it's a new universe.
Exactly.
And what Marvel is doing uniquely is having a single universe that makes sense for the most part within the feature film iteration. So one, I can't see that happening. And two, if I at all had if anyone ever, for whatever, if they had a stroke and they let me into the boardroom for some reason, I would argue tooth and nail, do not recast these characters, because it's a safe creative choice and a redundant choice. And given their ability to launch new characters, peripheral characters who 10 years ago we never thought could carry their own trilogy or franchise into $1 billion+ territory. I mean, you try to say Black Panther could have make $1.3 billion and tell someone in 2005, they'd be like, no, we can't have that. No, it doesn't have the name recognition. It's a diversity character, minority character. So if Marvel is so adeptly able to launch so many characters, and if there are still such a wealth of characters left in the Marvel repertoire, and also new characters being created for that repertoire, why in the ever-loving fuck, pardon my French, would we just go back and recast a character when they've already been done so perfectly by actors like Chris Hemsworth or Robert Downey Jr. or Chris Evans?
Like I said, there's a precedent for it in the comics. There is a precedent for it in the comics, but I think
But film is a different medium.
It's a different medium, but it's really going to come down to what you as a fan, or what I as a fan, or what people as fans want to see. Like in the comics, I know sales have been up since they've recast some of these characters. Like Miles Morales is a very, very popular character, and people are buying Miles Morales comics, but it's like, will people see a Miles Morales movie? I mean, they did. They made one.
Well, it was amazing.
But one in the MCU, you're right. Like we now associate Spider-Man with Tom Holland, at least in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's like, is somebody else going to be able to be Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
I don't know. Three or four universes. You have the Tobey Maguire, the reboot
Spider-Man's
with Andrew
a weird
Garfield, then the Marvel iteration with Tom Holland, and then Into the Spider-Verse, which is kind of purposely like an alternate reality and an alternate reality Spider-Man story in a different artistic medium. And this is great. I love I literally actually love every iteration of Spider-Man, all four of them in its own right. Still not comparable to the MCU in my opinion.
Yeah, well, it's because it's different. Captain America is a better example. It's like,
certainly,
because like in the comics, right? Like who is it? Either Sam or Bucky is Captain America right now. I forget which one. They are.
See, that
they
could
are.
make sense.
Yeah,
if the Winter Soldier shed his identity and became Captain America, I would believe that, because in the story it has been established over the course of almost 10 years that Bucky and Steve are inseparable and almost have a shared heart.
Just
and
make
consciousness.
it make sense. Yeah,
make it make sense and make it feel like something that if it
I
happened
agree.
in today's
I agree with
headlines,
that. Yeah,
it would
I
make
agree
sense.
with
Yeah,
that. I agree with that. And you know what? Like, I trust Kevin Feige. Like I do.
Yeah.
Like if he's good at anything, it's being able to set things up and pay them off in a way that feels organic. Like Endgame and Infinity War are a great example. Like if they wanted to say, like, we're going to have somebody else take up the mantle of Captain America or somebody else take up the mantle of Iron Man, if there's any studio that is going to be able to introduce someone and make that make sense, it's probably Marvel. Like, I don't think they just drop somebody into the mix and say, oh, this person's Iron Man now. Like, it would have to be set up and it would have to make sense, but I think they could make it make sense.
So if there's anyone that we could cryogenically freeze, preserve, bestow immortality upon, or clone, in my opinion, it would have to be Kevin Feige, because we need this guy to keep working for many more decades to bring us these kinds of stories.
He is the new Walt Disney in a weird way.
Whoa,
he is like the new Walt Disney, which is funny since he's working.
Yeah,
for
made
Disney,
stranger by the fact that Marvel and Disney are essentially one entity. Well, I feel like that was a pretty broad and comprehensive analysis.
We went off.
Yeah, I think we thought like maybe 20 minutes, but this has evolved into something much more comprehensive. But I mean, that's a good thing. Like, I think part of the reason we do these discussions, and we're actually recording this one in person, and 90% of the Screen Fever discussions we've done so far have actually been over the phone or done remotely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the reason we spend our time doing this, and the reason we put so much effort and energy and enthusiasm in it, is that digging deep in these kinds of conversations and losing yourself within art or a creative universe is kind of like why we like film criticism in the film community. And like, I guess, and it's just amazing to me that Marvel has cultivated its own distinct, indelible feeling like Star Wars has. Like, the fact of the matter is Marvel will never, ever, ever make me feel how I felt watching the original trilogy when I'm 13, or even watching the original trilogy now.
Yeah.
But shrewd storytellers are finding their own way to do something different within whatever their realm is, whatever their creative realm or whatever property they have. Yeah. It's cool. It's an age of franchise storytelling, but that can be a good thing.
Yeah, and like I said, it's fun to do this, and it's fun to postulate and say like, oh well, what is going to happen in Endgame? What is the universe going to look like after Endgame? How are they going to deal with a lot of these superheroes? But it's fun to do that, but at the same time, it's like they're going to do what they're going to do, and it's just a question of whether or not they're going to do it well. And I think they're going to do it really. I'm confident that this movie's going to be really good, and it's certainly going to make a lot of money. But I think it'll
so
definitely satisfy.
more or less than Infinity War. What do you think in terms of
money? We're just talking about money now.
Money, just out of curiosity. Predictions. Let's do it.
I mean, they're saying it might go for $1 billion opening weekend.
But total
in total though,
gross.
I mean, it'll probably. I mean, it's going to be hard. It's every movie ever is going to have a hard time outpacing Avatar. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. Like that movie, that movie made more money than is probably humanly possible for a movie to make. And yet it did.
So
will it make more than any movie other than Avatar? I think probably. I think it's got a good chance at doing
so
that.
So it gets a number 2.
Yeah.
Well, then pick a number if you can. I hate to put this on you, but what do you think? Global,
like, oh man,
global gross.
Two point. Oh,
I have one. I'll go
What's
first.
yours?
2.25. So
that was what I was going to say.
$2.25 billion.
I was going to say 2.25,
which is like slightly more than Titanic, I think, and then about 200 million more than Infinity War.
Yeah. But it'll also, it also depends on if it has legs or not. A lot of times, movies that gross that much have legs and are able to sustain audiences over extended periods of time. Like that's a lot of the reason why Titanic and Avatar made that much money. I know we're going into deep box office analytics here, but
Avatar didn't even gross above 100 million for its first weekend, but it just kept grossing huge every weekend.
Same with Titanic. Like Titanic, when it came out, made a lot of money in its first couple of weeks, but then it was still at the top of the box office in April. 4 months later. I mean, so that's why that movie made that much money, is because people just kept seeing it over and over and over and over and over again, and taking their friends and their friends going over and over and over again. So for a movie to make those James Cameron kinds of numbers, people are going to have to be, not only is everybody going to have to see it, but everybody is going to have to see it over and over again. So I don't know. We'll see.
Well, as long as the story doesn't consist of Ant-Man being inserted rectally rectally into Thanos and then transforming back to normal size, thus ending Thanos. As long as it doesn't take on that story route. Component, I feel like we're in for a very, very, very good movie.
We will see. We will see.
So thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion. Let us know in the comments section, what are your feelings about the MCU and where this creative universe is at, and what are your predictions for Endgame, and where you'd like to see the universe go forward, the MCU go forward. So be sure to like and comment on the video and subscribe if you've enjoyed this discussion and want to see more Screen Fever content. We're also on Facebook now. We seem to be ever expanding. So we're on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify. Our Home Experience podcast is on iTunes, and our feature-length discussions also air on Odyssey Radio, which is odsy1.com. 24-hour sci-fi, paranormal entertainment radio. We've just joined the family recently. And until then, I guess I'll see you on the other side of Endgame. Maybe we can come back and talk for another hour after the movie's done.
Have a spoiler heavy discussion.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, I'm Adam.
I'm Jackson.
And we'll see you later.